Yeah, I left my corporate job last January, but I've always had an entrepreneurial bent. My dad's an entrepreneur, had a marketing company for years and years. Always, anything I've ever tried or done, I've tried to start a little business from it.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to Quality Podcast, Season 1, Episode 8. Are we on Episode 8 already?
Episode 8. Are we on Episode 8 already? Episode 8. Are we on Episode 8 already?
With guest Angela Penton. We're so happy to have Angela with us today. Angela is the process detective, owner of Openfield Process Improvement from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Her mission is to help build systems that work for people. Angela, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I've been listening, so thank you for inviting me on to be a guest.
Well, we're excited to have you. You're an entrepreneur. Run your own business. We do a lot of the same kind of work, helping companies improve their processes, improve their business outcomes, right, through process improvement. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself and Openfield CI?
Yeah, well, I started this last year, actually right before the pandemic started, and I've actually come from the world of trades and being a builder and being a process user, and working. I was also an artist for 20 years while I was being in the trades, and I think I've always been doing process improvement and learning about it without actually having the framework of lean, and then I decided at 40 years old to level up a bit, and I went and studied industrial engineering technology, and it was like an instant match. The way they advertised it was to attract students was like professional problem solver. And that's pretty much what I do. So I come from ground up of working as a worker, but the people that do the work every day, and I think I bring a lot of that perspective in. And then when I started working with senior management teams, I was able to bridge that gap a lot easier. And so I think I have a special place in my heart for making company processes work for people, because I know from personal experience that when you make when the company's processes really work for people and the obstacles are removed, then you can get a lot more done.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think I've seen, some of your pragmatic approach in, your online presence. And I get along pretty well with everybody, except snobby people. I don't really, get along with them very well. But I have found that people who, uh, sort of actually do work before getting into management, and especially process improvement and continuous improvement, tend to do better. Part of that is just sharing language with the people doing the work. And part of it is just, the real life and textbook, like they don't match, at least that's been my experience. So I appreciate, my schooling, and formal education, but it supplements kind of the real education that I've gotten working with actual people and actual companies. And ironically, I think the one topic that I had one class in grad school, and it was a good class, but it was too theoretical, on leadership. That's the difference maker, especially nowadays when you can get so many answers on Google. but can you persuade others to improve for the better? So I don't know, hopefully the education system is evolving and we'll kind of catch up with that, but that's just my experience.
And I think it's, I think we're starting to move past the idea of, we're moving past the kind of class system when it comes to who does what kind of work, like the white collar versus the, versus trades. It's not versus, but that perception, I think people, the trades, and when I say trades, I also mean, technicians, people that fix equipment, people that are assembly line workers. Like there's starting to be an elevation of like how important these people are to business, and that it's not really acceptable anymore to to people if you want to keep good people. It's not really acceptable anymore to because it's easy for people to find other jobs, once they get their skills. But yeah, and I think, but you were saying about the education part, I mean, I think it gives me a little bit of a unique perspective that maybe other people that come into industrial engineering don't have as much. But without doing like my green belt and without learning project management and learning the statistics and really learn a lot more about business, like I wouldn't have been able to make that jump. Like I had to have that really solid educational piece. Now I was really lucky because my program wasn't like a university program. So it was like industrial engineering technology. So mine was right from the very beginning, we were working in the field. So we were working and doing projects in the field at the exact same time as doing our exams and studying statistics and everything like that.
Oh, great.
But my course, what's that?
I like that approach.
It was like an apprenticeship almost, right?
Yeah,
and some of the places I worked, we would do like a few months. So I was like doing contract work right from the very beginning, and getting a chance to work with different types of companies. Some were manufacturing. I worked for a healthcare company. I worked for an airplane part manufacturer, a box printer. So it was really great to get that different experience. But yeah, the education piece, essential.
Well, thanks for telling our listeners a little bit about yourself. And we're thrilled to have you on today. And my understanding is you'd like to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart, which is why it's so important to go to where the work is being done to solve real business problems. So tell me a little bit more about that.
So that is something that, again, when I was studying lean and learning about what the foundations of it that was the thing that really stood out to me on a really deep level, that it can be looked at as a platitude. We talk about going to the Gemba, and it can be, sometimes it's overused as this thing, oh yeah, you should do this, but I find that it is often skipped over because people don't have enough time. They think they don't have time. They don't want to actually see the problems, or they want to, they're really operating from a place of assumptions that their data is telling them a certain thing, or the things that used to work a certain way 5 years ago, or they've got SOPs written about how the process works, and they make major strategic decisions based on things that aren't actually happening. And there's a wealth of information out there about reality that can inform them, in my experience. So one of the things that I really tried to think about when I got the invite from you guys was, have I ever been able to really solve a problem for a company have I ever actually been able to really move forward on a project and get results without doing a lot of work in the field and going to the people that do the process. And so I really tried to think like, and I don't think there's any project I've worked on where I didn't need to go out and get information past the original information I was given.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is, it's just something that I feel that out of all the stuff that I've learned in Lean, it is the most true and the most consistently required. It's like the foundation of it all for me.
Yeah, and have you found that leaders sometimes go to Gemba almost as a checklist, on their daily leader standard work. But when a problem comes up, they don't go to Gemba. Have you experienced?
That's interesting. Well, to be honest, the companies that I've worked with, except for one, none of them have actually been lean organizations. I came in as a process improvement or process specialist person, bringing these ideas with me, and they were kind of novel. So the idea of going to the Gemba or going to where the work is done is not something that was part of their daily routine anyway. So I had the job of trying to bring this practice in to an organization that wasn't used to doing it. And so I would say that they weren't necessarily practicing going to the Gemba as a regular thing, but that the reasons they weren't going were more about an assumption that the people that were out there doing the work just didn't know better. Like they just didn't have the full picture of what the business needed. So involving them just took too much time because you'd have to explain things. And then as that happened, you could see the disconnect between and the divergence of like what was actually happening in the business versus what the leaders were trying to make happen.
Yeah, interesting.
So does that make sense?
It does make sense. And I like that you brought up, a lot of your clients not being lean companies. That's certainly true on my end. And in fact, I would say that my broad experience is that lean has a bit of a reputation in the business world of being too cost intensive, too complicated, not applicable to anything other than automotive manufacturing, scary, et cetera, et cetera. So I intentionally don't market, my services as lean, but instead focus on operational excellence. I can help you make your business better. Now, all the tools that I'm using came from lean or Six Sigma, if we're talking about the project management side and statistical analysis. But that's a real thing where people can be turned off, and we did it to ourselves really, because I mean, if you have to speak Japanese to make your business better, come on. I mean, really? Even go to Gemba. Why do we say
that? Yeah. Oh, that's one of the first thing I learned was when I started going out in the field and talking to technicians and talking to, I remember one of the first big independent projects I had as a contractor after school, and I went out and I was so fresh and excited, and I was like going in and talking about the DMAIC process and trying to do presentations on I was such a little purist and like just so not recognizing how foreign it was to people. And then and so I just, over time, I've just stopped using any lean. I don't say Gemba. I have said it for a few people because when they start asking questions, when they start being interested in why do you go out and get, because I kept saying, well, I'm going to go out and do some field work and come back. And luckily I've had some super supportive people on my teams that have been like, they've seen the results, so they're open to it. And they're like, how do you do that? So then I'll start telling them, well, this is the origin. This is where I learned. It's, in lean, it's called going to the Gemba, and then this is why, this is what it means. And then it generates a little bit of interest that there's something backing me up. It's not just my crazy brain. It's like, it's been done, it's not something new, but something natural to me to do. But no, I think, and I think I've never been a purist at anything. I'm kind of like, I've gotten a lot of flack on my LinkedIn content. You're talking about my social media, because I'm one of those people who uses the tools sometimes willy-nilly. I do DMAIC and lean, and whatever situation is arising, I try to think of whatever way that audience, I can relate to them and help them get over to the next level. And sometimes that has, it doesn't have a lean name. It's like something that I've combined, spaghetti maps with time studies and, whatever it needs. Because if I only have like a couple days to get data, then you got to get creative. And because I haven't worked for an organization that was already completely like had a lean foundation, and I was not in a position I didn't have the position of influence to go in and say, we're going to make this a lean company. And the leadership was just like, yeah, whatever, just remove this obstacle now. Which is fine. I mean, that's their objective, right? That's what I'm there to do, to make things happen. But
I found it more difficult to work with self-proclaimed lean companies, to be honest with you. Partly because they're frequently not very good at it, and everybody is a little too over-educated and under-practiced. But good. So we're talking about the importance of going to Gemba and, specifically dealing with, leadership in the company, like before you make a decision, right? And you mentioned that, a lot of leaders make assumptions about their problems without going to see for themselves. Tell me a little bit more about that and your experience with that.
Yeah, so there's a couple different takes. I think there's one of them is how the leaders of the company experience the symptoms of the problem, and they're seeing it from maybe like an executive summary part, or they see it because they're involved with other things. It's not, it's not necessarily because they don't want to, but I was in a position once where the request for the contract was to make their people work faster, because the way they were experiencing it and seeing it, they literally had a perch where like the owner would like walk up above the work area and see everything. And he saw people redoing things, standing around. There's a lot of standing around that is because, as you know, because there's a piece of equipment not available, because there's a problem or machine they're trying to jerry rig, because there's some kind of issue, because they've got too many people in one area and not enough people in another area, right?
Yeah, and
so they didn't have the reason.
Yeah, I'm going to go off on a tangent on that one a little bit. Leadership conflating the problem and the solution. So I run into this all the time. We're all here. We just need our people to work faster, or even we need less waste. Well, what's your actual problem? You don't know what your problem is. You haven't defined it. You've jumped straight to a solution, and it's usually not a good one. It's the only way that you know how to frame a problem, because in some leadership cultures, you're sort of trained to always have all the answers instead of be being the person that asks the questions, right? Um,
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yep. And I was guilty of that even when I first started in this career because of, wanting to do a good job and being, say, coming in as the only lean or process specialist person in the company, that's what my role was called. I felt like I needed to have solutions right away. I needed to present something that, and then I quickly learned that, I made a few mistakes where I didn't come up, like the solution just wasn't based in reality. I needed to get more information. But the other thing is so people wanting them to work faster. And I think another thing that's happening, and maybe you've experienced this too, is that companies are becoming more data driven. And so they're getting more and more data, and they aren't really understanding what the data is telling them. So they're getting a report that filters through various biases, like the finance department gives them one, and sales department gives them another, and they're left with this big pile of data, and they're making major strategic decisions on this data that looks pretty and it's in a pie chart, so it must be true. And they're not actually seeing the context behind their numbers. They're not seeing the real context of it's not really telling them the problem. It's telling them the symptom again. And so people say, well, so they're not looking at, is this data real? Is this data actually telling us something? They make an assumption that the data is real. So they pass down yet another a solution that we're going to do this new system. Or like, say, for instance, I was just on like a big ERP transition. So change the ERP system, massive decision for the company, massive change. And a lot of things happened based on an assumption of what the processes were. So this is basically how we do it in the company. And everybody at every single branch was actually doing it differently. Mm-hmm. So you come in with a standardized system and lay down a completely standardized system on top of a completely unstandardized process.
Yeah.
So that's another thing of not going to the Gemba to actually validate what's happening.
Yeah, very common. My grandfather was an engineer, and he used to joke about SAP in the 80s, and they would advertise that companies that switched to SAP saw a 30% improvement in productivity. And he said that was true, but the reason that they saw the improvement was not because they were using SAP, it's because they had to standardize before they could use software. And he always got a good belly laugh out of that one.
Yes.
So here I am, 20 years later, getting my master's degree and taking a course on ERP implementation. And, the class starts out with only 7% of implementations will succeed. And the rest of the class was just a commentary on like that opening paragraph, right? And that's the biggest thing is just that companies and the people that make up companies are trying to win every day, and they're doing kind of whatever it takes, and there's no margin in the business to absorb stopping the workflow if things aren't right. And workarounds become almost mandatory at that point. And so the company itself is introducing the special cause of variance if we're approaching it from a statistical sort of standpoint. And we end up being not our own worst enemies, but certainly not our own best friends. And in my experience, training people to take a step back and not do that is pretty challenging.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about the workarounds because like in my experience, and I know this is another kind of platitude, but I do see it as true in most circumstances, is that the people out there closest to the customer that have that clock on them that are producing stuff, they actually come into work wanting to do the right thing and wanting to get their work done to a high level of quality. And it's a shame when when they have system obstacles every day that they need to make hurdles over, or equipment that is just old. They don't have a preventative maintenance system. They're dealing with real tangible obstacles in their day-to-day work that are preventing them from reaching these higher goals that the company needs to meet. And the workarounds that people come up with are genius. Like sometimes not like the safest thing, but things, but the way that they will do whatever they need to do to serve their customer, and the way they'll bend the rules, and the way all the little secret processes that exist in a company to make it run every day. It's work. People are proud of them. People are like, look at this friggin' thing that I built with my bare hands to make this changeover work way faster. I know we need this other piece. I'm just, giving a basic generalization of some stuff I've seen. But they're genius. And I actually, I actually sometimes have found things that I've, actually helped implement at other branches or other places, because it's like, that's a great workaround, especially when you're dealing with software that's like rigid, like you can't bend the rules of the software. So they find ways around it, with individual customers. But the only problem is that it's not the only problem, but leaders don't know the level of secret processes, I'll call them, that are in their company. And so when they do need to standardize because they're trying to scale something and they don't know about these things, they might look at it as a lack of compliance. They're not seeing the intelligence and the creativity that could be harnessed to actually, because people will, before they jerry rig something, they will often complain, or they will try to bring up with their supervisor. They'll talk about it with each other. Like, God, this is so annoying. This thing keeps happening. Or this piece of software, like every time, if we just had some Wi-Fi boosters in here, we'd be able to use our tablets to do this instead of having to go over to the computer. Wouldn't that be awesome? And then someone from the IT department is like, no, sorry, not in the budget. So they just say, well, okay, that's when you hear stuff like, that's not my job, above my pay grade. When you start hearing stuff like that, it's because people have complained. They've got the ideas, they know the problem. It doesn't get fixed, so they continue on with their jerry rigging.
Yeah.
Ingeniously.
And eventually the workarounds become the process. I worked with one company and they had spent millions of dollars on a tier 1 ERP. And this thing could do everything. And if you want to know how to use it, all you have to do is Google. There's YouTube videos, whatever. It's a common, world-class ERP. And this particular facility did about 200 trailers a day, inbound and outbound, maybe more. And they were using a spreadsheet to track the trailers in and out of the building, which really got me scratching my head, because that's what an ERP is supposed to do. Like, that's its main job. That's what you paid for.
Yeah.
But nobody, somebody paid the money for it. Nobody knew how to use it or configure it properly, but everybody knows how to use Excel, right? And so next thing you know, we're spending hundreds of labor hours per week just filling out a spreadsheet when the software could do it all for you, and generate reports and, has a built-in dashboard, everything that you want, it can do for you. And they were basically just using it for inventory management, and the rest of it was manual. So that was a interesting situation, but that's what happens, right? Is something doesn't work, but we're not going to lose. We're not just going to sit on our hands and say, well, I guess nobody gets paid today. We find a way around it. And after enough time, that workaround becomes the approved process, right? And I think that ties back in to what you were saying earlier, which was a really good observation. You have leaders that aren't in the habit of going to where the work is done to observe and sort of making decisions off of the basis of data, a spreadsheet, a report, something like that. And they won't understand the amount of friction or value loss that happens as you put a patch on top of a patch on top of a patch. And you can't see that. And numbers can't tell you that.
Yeah.
So you might see a 5% improvement in some metric quarter over quarter. What you can't see is all of the employees that are really fed up and are thinking about what their options are, because it takes so much work and so much mental stress to get that outcome.
Yeah, with an ERP system, that if a company, say, was working on on-time delivery as one of their key metrics in their company, and they're basing so many decisions on, well, this is one of our main thing, on-time delivery. This is how we know our supply chain's working. This is how we know our production's working. All sorts of things going into this one little measurement. And all people had to do was change the date, the customer required date. And there's their on-time delivery. Yep, we made it. So the leaders that figured out that that's what they did, that even though it's not compliance, it's not what you're supposed to do, getting that stick off their back of they know what they're doing. We need to, that on-time delivery thing became a checkbox of their performance or their bonus or whatever. So you do that. So it became an approved process. So the company was spending a lot of effort trying to have a lot of meetings about it, have a lot of wasted time talking about on-time delivery, instead of talking about actually talking to customers. Are they getting their, not going to the source of what are the obstacles that are blocking people from getting stuff to the customers. And because some of the problems that companies are dealing with are so big, especially after years of adding these patches on, it becomes so complex. Some of these problems are so big that just the thought of having to really solve these major problems with inventory or space or processes that just don't work anymore for a big company, it's too daunting. So it's easier to just get a new technical system, or to get a new person in a new role, to try to to keep making change after change.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the people that are doing the work just see it as, I think where this rift between management and the workforce staff gets bigger and bigger. Because so I think that maybe, I don't know what you think about this, but sometimes maybe there's a perception from senior leaders that the people out in the field, they don't understand the business, and that they don't, it's too much effort for not enough reward. So it's they don't know how to ask the right questions, because often the problems are not articulated they're not articulated in terms of ROI. They're not articulated in terms of the metrics that are important to the long-term health of the company. They're very immediate, tangible things.
Yeah.
So it's they don't know how to ask the right questions of each other. Like the people in the field
Yeah.
they're not going to say like, how can I help you achieve your strategic vision? Like, tell me about your strategic vision. They're not
Yeah.
going to ask those questions.
And going the other direction, the kinds of things that management can be interested in and the questions they ask sound just idiotic to the people doing the work. Well, why do you care about your uh, hurdle rate, and your margins? Because if you don't fix this machine right now, you're going to go out of business. So let's solve that, right? And it's interesting because we've developed a lot of jargon around uh, talking to people. So you have go to Gemba. There's whole books on how to do a Gemba walk, um, and they're necessary. In fact, I have a chapter in my book on how to talk to people. Um, Voice of the customer. I took some training on voice of the customer, VOC, and your customers include your employees. It includes your internal customers, your external customers, and I just thought to myself, all of this stuff is just how to talk to people. At the end of the day, we need to be talking to different stakeholders and on a regular enough basis that we can course correct and identify issues. So a lot of what I do is work with management to help people be more human. The engineering side of what I do is in my mind, is a very small part of helping businesses succeed. You know, Having an employee suggestion board is completely meaningless if you don't use it to communicate with your employees. Um, Same thing with some voice of the customer program. And I worked for a company where we would get a VOC score once a quarter. We didn't know what it meant, who was talking to whom, what the issues were. We got a 3.5. Well, what does that mean? Because it was a survey that was sent out by the sales and marketing department to different representatives of different accounts. And they would, on a scale of 1 to 10, are you likely to recommend our company to a friend or coworker? That sort of thing. Um, so they didn't understand what VOC, really should be. But all it is talking to people and having, the approachability and humility to listen to another person's perspective. It's not the end of the world. We hope that they disagree with me and with everyone else, because if we all agreed, we'd all be communists, right?
That's funny. Jake and I joke about how much Americans hate communists. He can put something there, especially on Independence Day. I think I feel really privileged to be, I find that a lot of my role is to become a liaison between different groups and between senior, like, so vertical and horizontal liaison, communication liaison, where that's why I say, when people kept asking me when I first started my business, well, what do you do? What do you do? It's hard to describe without sounding really technical. That's where I said process detective, because I really just go and I just keep asking questions and I keep trying to investigate what's actually going on until we have that aha moment, till we break down that assumption, and then two different groups all of a sudden are like, oh, okay, that's what's happening. So they're not lazy, or they're not like just assholes trying to make us do stupid things, new things every month. And when they actually come up, and I mean, I love even working across groups that are like, say, IT department and supply chain department, or operations and IT is like one of my favorite intersections, because I love like making that language make sense to each other. But that it really, my job more and more comes down to communication. And I'm getting out of practice with statistics, honestly, because I try to like keep on top of like that part of the business, but that's not often what I end up asking to do. So much of my job ends up coming down to overcoming assumptions. So they tell me the statistic that they're looking for, and I'm not necessarily in my role as a lean practitioner. I find, and maybe it's because I'm working with smaller companies, but I find that I'm not just purely going out there and making a metric, like increasing metrics. Like I'm capable of doing that, but the only way that happens is first by like getting the buy-in, finding out what their real obstacles are, and finding out what is a good day to them. Like what does that metric even mean? Sometimes it's even replacing metrics. So you have this company metric. Okay, now let's make up our own metrics that will feed into that are actually meaningful to like how many times can you get how many times is information coming from the salespeople that's incomplete, where the production people have to go back and ask more questions and they have to go back to the customer? How many defects are caused by communication breakdowns because they just don't have the right information, or there was a mistake in the inventory was labeled wrong on the shelf? Things like really tangible things, those all add up, but those metrics aren't, those metrics help the day-to-day flow work, and you have to just find ways to make those feed into a larger metric that's important to an executive metric, say, I'll call it.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm not sure if it's even needed to bridge. It's not even, I don't even know if you can get to the point where you can have the same metric. And that's an ideal situation, but you often don't have time. In my position, I might not have the leeway to do that. I'm in there temporarily. My fastest way that I have found to make things better for a company is to go right to the source. Especially if I'm going into a situation where, I mean, I have a lot of technical know-how. I'm really comfortable in shops and machines and everything, but obviously I don't know their process. I don't know every production and installation process out there. So the fastest way that I've always been able to work is to ask the people that do the work, and they will educate me very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
I don't know how else to do it.
Yeah, it's very efficient, but there's more to it than that. So when I'm talking with Jake, sometimes we will talk about, the most selfish sociopath in the world. Like, what would they do, right? And what's hilarious is most of the time they will do the best thing, because even though they are a selfish sociopath, they still want to win, right? So treating your employees with respect, for example, you might hate people, you might be an evil person, but you're going to treat your people with respect so that they stay and produce, and happy cows produce more milk and all of that stuff, right? And so I think that even a sociopath would go to where the work is done and ask questions as the most efficient way of getting at usable facts. But if you are not an evil sociopath, there's an added benefit, which is you're forming relationships with the people that are putting bread on your table every night, right?
Yeah, so there's a lot of talk, especially in, bigger companies, about how to prevent turnover. There's an ulterior motive, we'll say, but whatever works, right?
Yeah.
But it's, people shouldn't be surprised at all or nervous to see the owner of the company or senior managers coming in. It shouldn't be like, oh, so-and-so's here. Okay, put everything, it shouldn't be this big thing. It should be a normal occurrence. And I think that with companies that do Gemba walks, like that's it, but you still have the senior team coming around. And but one of the simplest questions, just asking, of course, there's the obligatory, how's your day going? What's up? How are you doing? How's the kids? Blah, blah, blah. But really just, what's bugging you today? Or what is the problem this week? And if people are always saying there's no problem, and that there's issues going on, that could be a reflection on you, maybe not interacting enough. I do want to get results. I do want to get results quickly. And I know that, like, in order to do my job, I mean, I've had to influence hundreds of people to do something they didn't want to do at all, that didn't even make sense for them, that I knew that was problematic. And my job ended up being how to through this change that's inevitably going to happen. And my job is to try to smooth that transition and to try to gather up any risks and red flags to present to the senior team as quickly as possible to make sure that it didn't bite them later. So you're working very fast. And the only reason I was able to get these people to do some of these projects that they were just like, oh, this is a nightmare, I don't want to do it, is because I had spent months like talking to them every day and helping them on little tiny problems. And
Yeah.
like their light is broken, getting them a new light. You know, there's something that is they're racking, like some of their racking doesn't have bars across their top and it makes them nervous. And finding, you know, taking pictures of it and going to representing them and going to their senior manager or their manager and saying like, look, this isn't really acceptable, safety, blah, blah, blah. And so is nervous and they're worried about reporting it. And what can I do to help you get these bars in as quickly? I'll go find you a good deal.
Yeah.
And being that support person and like actually jumping in and helping them wrap pallet. If I'm in there collecting data and they're like, get out of my way because we need to get all this stuff out by 5 o'clock. Like actually just stopping and helping them wrap pallets or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like in a smaller, bringing that corporate thing back down to a more smaller business attitude where there's more of a connection between the goals of everybody.
Yeah.
So
and forming those relationships, you know, through everyday interaction at Gemba, right, provides you a basis for future improvement as well, right? You're building real relationships and some trust, hopefully, if you're doing it right, so that, you know, at some point you're going to ask people, hey, I'm asking you to change, and it's difficult and it sucks, and I know that, but they know who you are at that point. They know what you value. They know you care about them, and so it's a different dynamic than that scary person from corporate who shows up once a year and screws up everything for everybody, right?
Yeah. One of the lines I find that actually has helped, and it's true, it's what I do, but what I'll say to people if they're really upset about this happening and they start, you know, getting upset with me like I am someone that's trying to ruin their day, is basically like, this is going to happen. This change is going to happen, and it's probably going to happen faster than you're before. This is an opportunity right now for you to put input into how it happens. So you have a choice right now. If you want to start helping me, if you help me get this information, and if you help me do these, like, you know, whatever needs to be done, basically, if you help me write this training material or whatever it is, if we work together, you have a chance to actually have input. You may not get rewarded for it, but you have input into making this change easier for your team. Are you in? And a lot of times they'll be like, okay, I'll help.
I love that approach.
And and it's like, it's not against the leaders, and it's not like trying to side, it's not being false. It's just really like, this is happening. Like, you are an adult, you have a choice. If you really hate it, you can leave the company or you can do something else. But like, if you want to stay, this is your chance to make this a little more palatable and fun. And sometimes too, it's about helping the company find like, I like to use that software term, like the minimum viable product.
Yeah.
Of like, if you're making a change or you have to standardize, like, let's find the minimum viable things, the situation that has to be done in order for this new tech to be implemented, or this change to be implemented. What are the things that have to change, and what are the things that they can just keep? and just like, okay, just keep doing those things. They aren't perfect, but like, what is the thing that will make it all the groups happy and function together, and the rest just kind of like let it go for now.
Yeah. So that's a fantastic approach. And, the minimum viable product approach allows companies to establish standards and get that culture in place without holding back the business. I, I use the metaphor of a manual transmission in a car. You can't go from 0 to 5th gear. You have to go to 1st and 2nd and 3rd. And sometimes companies are in neutral and they want to be Toyota. Well, you can't. That's going from 0 to 5th gear, right? Your next step is not there.
Yeah.
And the MVP approach allows a company to sort of establish the culture of, we're going to have standards, without bogging the business down with a bunch of add-ons that it's just not ready for, and a bunch of precision that it just can't handle and still serve the customers, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's too much change all at once. People, we know everyone is, scared of change and resistant just by nature. What are some of the standards that you can put in place that will actually make people's jobs easier and help the company make more money? Like, I do believe that there are doesn't have to be in opposition. Like, there really are points out there that will work for everybody. In my ideal world, like, I'd be able to find those things on every job, but sometimes it is just trying to help get people through a change and trying to help groups communicate. I just had one more thought too about why it's so important to go to the Gemba a lot and go out there in the field every day. Is I find that, sometimes when I'm first investigating an issue, the problem looks like it's in isolation. So you see, this is the area that it's in, this process, it's this group of people, or it's this machine, or whatever. The more you're out there and the more you talk to people and actually just as normal part of your day, for me, I find I start being able to make relationships between these problems. Like, my brain starts connecting the dots between this conversation and that conversation, and starting to see these big, broad problems, that something in supply chain, how that's affecting sales, or you start to see the cross problems, and then you can start coming up with improvement projects that might have more impact in more areas. Whereas if you go out once a week, or if you go out just your obligatory amount to get only a very specific amount of information, you might end up working on a problem and neglecting, either missing an opportunity to have a big impact somewhere else, or actually creating problems in other areas. So it's like a big puzzle. I think that's the problem solving part that I love, but you don't get that unless you have all those conversations and you're looking at the data. So you're looking at all this data and you're also backing it up, and then the data starts to be really meaningful.
Well, I can tell that you love it because you're really good at what you do. And I think that's a good place to wrap the episode. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on Equality Podcast. Angela, thank you for being with us. I'm going to put all of your contact information on the screen and down below in the description of the video section.
Basically, I would like to leave that if you're already talking to people every day and that's how you solve problems, then just keep doing it. And if you're nervous about going out there, then just start tomorrow.
Fantastic advice. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye now.
Bye-bye.